Hashtag the crown's choice. Part 1. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Aldermere Palace as Queen Isabella walked briskly through the ornate corridors. Her silk gown rustled softly with each step, the sound echoing off the high ceilings adorned with centuries-old paintings of past monarchs. Today was different from any other day in her 30-year reign. Today, she would make a decision that would shake the very foundations of the kingdom. The whispers had started 3 months ago when Princess Elena, her daughter-in-law, had returned from her diplomatic mission to the neighboring kingdom of Westmarch. Elena had always been beloved by the people. Her grace, intelligence, and genuine care for the kingdom's welfare had made her a favorite among both nobility and commoners alike. But it was what she had discovered during her mission that would change everything. Queen Isabella paused before the heavy oak doors of the royal council chamber. Inside, she knew, waited the most trusted advisors of the realm, along with her son Prince Marcus and his wife Elena. Also present would be Lady Vivian, the Queen's second cousin who had married into the royal family 5 years ago when she wed the Queen's younger brother, Prince Theodore. The tension between Elena and Vivian had been building for years, though few understood the true depth of their rivalry. On the surface, both women appeared cordial, even friendly. They attended state functions together, participated in charity events, and maintained the perfect facade expected of royal family members. But beneath this polished exterior lay a battle for influence, respect, and, ultimately, the future direction of the kingdom. Vivian had always been ambitious. Born into minor nobility, she had seen her marriage to Prince Theodore as an opportunity to elevate her status and gain real power within the royal hierarchy. She was intelligent, cunning, and possessed a natural talent for political maneuvering that had served her well in court. Over the past 5 years, she had carefully cultivated relationships with keen nobles, wealthy merchants, and even some foreign dignitaries, building a network of allies who looked to her for guidance and favors. Elena, on the other hand, had never sought power for its own sake. The daughter of a respected duke from a neighboring kingdom, she had married Prince Marcus out of love rather than political calculation. Her approach to royal duties was guided by genuine compassion and a deep sense of responsibility to the people she served. Where Vivian saw opportunities for personal gain, Elena saw chances to improve lives and strengthen the kingdom's foundations. The conflict between them had remained largely hidden until Elena's recent discovery in Westmarch. During her diplomatic mission, she had uncovered evidence of a secret trade agreement that Vivian had been negotiating behind the royal family's back. The agreement would have granted significant mining rights to foreign companies in exchange for personal payments to a network of nobles, payments that would ultimately flow back to Vivian and her supporters. Queen Isabella pushed open the doors and entered the council chamber. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. The chamber itself was impressive, a circular room with a domed ceiling painted with scenes from the kingdom's founding. Around a massive mahogany table sat the 12 members of the royal council, their faces grave with the weight of the moment. Prince Marcus stood as his mother entered, his tall frame elegant in the formal military uniform that designated his position as heir apparent. At 32, he possessed the strong jawline and piercing blue eyes that were hallmarks of the royal bloodline. Beside him sat Elena, her auburn hair perfectly arranged despite the early hour. She wore a simple but elegant dress of deep emerald that complemented her green eyes and fair complexion. Across the table sat Lady Vivian, impeccably dressed, as always in a gown of midnight blue silk. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate style, and diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. She was undeniably beautiful, with the kind of refined features that artists loved to paint and poets loved to describe. But there was something calculating in her dark eyes that had always made Queen Isabella slightly uncomfortable. Prince Theodore sat beside his wife, looking uncomfortable with the entire situation. Unlike his older brother Marcus, Theodore had never shown much interest in the political aspects of royal life. He preferred books to battles, music to military strategy. His marriage to Vivian had surprised many, as she seemed so different from the gentle, scholarly prince. Lord Chancellor Hamilton cleared his throat and began reading from a formal document that outlined the charges against Vivian. His voice was steady, but Queen Isabella could see the concern in his weathered features. Hamilton had served the crown for over 20 years and had never had to deal with such a serious breach of trust within the royal family itself. The evidence Elena had gathered was substantial. Letters bearing Vivian's seal, financial records showing suspicious transactions, and testimony from witnesses in Westmarch all pointed to a carefully orchestrated scheme to enrich herself and her allies at the kingdom's expense. More troubling still were indications that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of corruption that stretched back several years. As Lord Hamilton concluded his presentation, the room remained silent for several long moments. Queen Isabella studied the faces around the table, reading the mixture of shock, disappointment, and anger in their expressions. Some of the council members had clearly suspected something was amiss, while others appeared genuinely surprised by the revelations. Vivian herself sat perfectly still throughout the presentation, her expression giving away nothing of her thoughts. Only the slight tightening around her eyes betrayed any emotion at all. When Lord Hamilton finished, she stood gracefully and addressed the room in a voice that was calm and controlled. She denied the charges, of course, claiming that the evidence had been misinterpreted or fabricated by her enemies within the court. She spoke of her devotion to the kingdom, her years of faithful service, and her shock at being accused of such terrible crimes. Her words were carefully chosen and delivered with just the right amount of wounded dignity and righteous indignation. But Elena was ready for this response. Rising from her seat with quiet confidence, she presented additional evidence that she had held in reserve. Bank records from 3 different kingdoms showing large deposits into accounts controlled by Vivian's associates. Correspondence with mining company representatives discussing the specific terms of their illegal agreements. Most damaging of all, a letter in Vivian's own handwriting to a business partner, discussing how to hide their activities from the naive royals who asked too many questions. The impact of this final piece of evidence was immediate and devastating. Several council members gasped audibly, while others shook their heads in disbelief. Even Prince Theodore looked stricken as he realized the full extent of his wife's deception. Queen Isabella watched it all unfold with a heavy heart. She had hoped, even as the evidence mounted, that there might be some innocent explanation for Vivian's actions. The Queen had always believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, in looking for the good in others rather than assuming the worst. But the facts were undeniable, and her duty to the kingdom was clear. The Queen stood, and immediately every person in the room rose as well, a gesture of respect that had been automatic for so many years that few even thought about it anymore. Queen Isabella's voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of 3 decades on the throne and the authority of a bloodline that stretched back over 4 centuries. She spoke first of her disappointment and sorrow at having to address such serious charges against a member of her own family. She acknowledged Vivian's contributions to various charitable causes and her role in several successful diplomatic initiatives. But she also made it clear that no one, regardless of their position or family connections, was above the law or exempt from the moral standards expected of those who serve the crown. The Queen then turned to Elena, publicly acknowledging her courage in bringing these serious matters to light despite the personal cost and potential danger. She praised Elena's dedication to justice and her unwavering commitment to the kingdom's welfare, even when it meant exposing uncomfortable truths about people she had to work with every day. The contrast between the 2 women could not have been more stark in that moment. Elena stood with quiet dignity, having taken no joy in exposing Vivian's crimes, but recognizing the necessity of doing so. Vivian, meanwhile, had finally lost her composed facade as the reality of her situation became clear. Her face was pale, except for two bright spots of color high on her cheekbones, and her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the back of her chair. Queen Isabella announced that pending a full investigation by the kingdom's highest court, Vivian would be stripped of all official duties and banned from participating in any government functions. Her assets would be frozen while investigators determined the full extent of her illegal activities and calculated how much money she had stolen from the kingdom's treasury. The announcement sent shockwaves through the assembled council members. Some had suspected that serious disciplinary action might be taken, but few had expected such swift and decisive punishment. The Queen's actions made it clear that she was taking these charges extremely seriously and would not allow family loyalty to interfere with justice. Prince Theodore looked devastated as he realized that his wife's actions had not only destroyed her own reputation, but had also tainted him by association. As Vivian's husband, he would inevitably face questions about what he knew and when he knew it. The gentle prince, who had always avoided political controversy, now found himself at the center of the biggest scandal to hit the royal family in decades. The ripple effects of the Queen's decision spread quickly throughout the palace. Servants whispered in corridors. Nobles canceled social engagements as they tried to determine where their loyalties should lie, and foreign ambassadors began sending urgent reports back to their home countries about the dramatic developments in Aldermere. Elena found herself in an unusual position as well. While she was being praised for her integrity and courage, she also knew that her actions had made her powerful enemies. Some of Vivian's allies would undoubtedly blame her for their patron's downfall, and there would likely be attempts at revenge or retaliation in the months to come. The Queen was well aware of these potential consequences when she made her public declaration of support for Elena. By clearly backing her daughter-in-law over Vivian, she was not just addressing the immediate crisis, but also sending a message about the values and principles that would guide the monarchy going forward. As the council meeting concluded and the various participants began to file out of the chamber, Queen Isabella remained seated, lost in thought about the challenges that lay ahead. She knew that Vivian's supporters would not simply accept defeat quietly. There would be attempts to discredit Elena, to minimize Vivian's crimes, and to paint the entire affair as a political witch hunt motivated by personal jealousy rather than genuine concern for justice. The Queen also knew that her decision would be scrutinized and criticized by foreign observers who might see it as a sign of weakness or internal division within the royal family. Some might even try to take advantage of the perceived instability to advance their own political or economic interests at Aldermere's expense. But despite these concerns, Queen Isabella felt confident that she had made the right choice. Elena had proven herself to be exactly the kind of person the monarchy needed in its ranks, someone willing to put principle above personal comfort, truth above convenience, and the kingdom's welfare above family loyalty or political expediency. The sun was now high in the sky, streaming through the tall windows of the council chamber and illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. Queen Isabella stood slowly, feeling every one of her 62 years in her aching joints, but also feeling a sense of renewal and hope for the future. The kingdom had faced crises before and emerged stronger. With people like Elena in positions of influence, she believed it would do so again. As she walked back through the palace corridors toward her private apartments, the Queen reflected on how this day would be remembered in the history books. It would be seen as a turning point, she thought, the moment when the monarchy reaffirmed its commitment to integrity and justice over political convenience and family loyalty. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors to Elena's quarters. Nobles who had previously been neutral in the rivalry between her and Vivian now sought audiences to pledge their support and distance themselves from the disgraced lady. Elena received them all with grace, but she was careful not to appear triumphant or vindictive. She understood that maintaining the dignity of the crown required her to rise above petty satisfaction, even in victory. Meanwhile, in another wing of the palace, Vivian was packing her belongings under the watchful eyes of royal guards. The woman who had once held such influence and commanded such respect, was now being escorted from the palace like a common criminal. The dramatic fall from grace was complete, but Elena knew that this was likely not the end of the story. Women like Vivian rarely accepted defeat gracefully, and there would undoubtedly be further chapters to this tale of ambition, corruption, and ultimate justice. Hashtag the crown's choice. Part 2. 3 weeks had passed since the dramatic confrontation in the royal council chamber, and the kingdom of Aldermere was still reeling from the revelations about Lady Vivian's corruption. The initial shock had given way to a complex web of political maneuvering as various factions within the court sought to position themselves in the new reality that Queen Isabella's decisive action had created. Princess Elena stood at the window of her study, watching the morning activities in the palace courtyard below. Servants hurried about their duties, guards changed shifts with military precision, and visiting dignitaries arrived for their scheduled audiences with various members of the royal family. On the surface, everything appeared normal, but Elena knew that beneath this veneer of routine, the palace was buzzing with tension and uncertainty. The investigation into Vivian's activities had expanded far beyond the initial charges. A team of the kingdom's most skilled financial investigators, led by Master Accountant Geoffrey Blackwood, had discovered evidence of a corruption network that stretched across multiple government departments and involved dozens of officials at various levels. The scale of the operation was staggering, with stolen funds estimated to be in the hundreds of thousands of gold pieces. Elena had been appointed by Queen Isabella to oversee the reform efforts that would be necessary to prevent such corruption from taking root again. It was a role that she accepted with both honor and trepidation, knowing that it would make her even more enemies among those who had benefited from the previous system of kickbacks and illegal arrangements. Her first major initiative had been the establishment of the Royal Integrity Commission, an independent body with the authority to investigate any government official suspected of corruption or abuse of power. The commission would report directly to the Queen and would have access to all financial records and correspondence of anyone holding a position of trust within the kingdom's administration. The announcement of this new body had been met with mixed reactions. Progressive nobles and reform-minded officials had praised it as a long-overdue step toward transparency and accountability. Conservative elements within the court, however, saw it as an overreach that would undermine the traditional relationships and informal arrangements that had governed palace politics for generations. Lord Reginald Worthington, one of the kingdom's oldest and most influential nobles, had been particularly vocal in his opposition to the new commission. During a heated debate in the House of Lords, he had argued that such heavy-handed oversight would destroy the trust and cooperation that were essential for effective governance. Elena had been present for that debate, sitting in the gallery reserved for members of the royal family. She had listened as Lord Worthington painted her reforms as the product of foreign influence and naive idealism, barely concealing his implication that her outsider status made her unfit to understand the delicate balance of Aldermere's political system. When given the opportunity to respond, Elena had risen with quiet dignity and delivered a speech that would be remembered as one of the defining moments of the crisis. She spoke not as a foreign princess seeking to impose alien values, but as someone who had come to love Aldermere and its people deeply enough to fight for their welfare against those who would exploit them. She reminded the assembled lords that corruption was not a tradition worth preserving, and that the informal arrangements Lord Worthington defended had resulted in the theft of funds that could have built schools, improved roads, and provided assistance to the kingdom's poor citizens. Her words carried special weight because everyone knew that she had personally benefited very little from exposing Vivian's network. If anything, she had made her own position more difficult and dangerous. The speech had a profound impact, not just on the House of Lords, but on public opinion throughout the kingdom. Word of Elena's passionate defense of reform spread quickly through the taverns and marketplaces where ordinary citizens gathered. For many, she became a symbol of hope that their voices might finally be heard and their welfare might finally matter to those in power. Queen Isabella had watched the debate from her private box, feeling a deep sense of pride in her daughter-in-law's courage and eloquence. The queen had always known that Elena possessed intelligence and compassion, but seeing her stand up to powerful opponents with such grace and conviction confirmed that she had made the right choice in backing her over Vivian. Prince Marcus, too, had been deeply moved by his wife's performance. As the heir apparent, he had always known that he would one day need a partner who could handle the pressures and responsibilities of ruling. Watching Elena face down hostile nobles and skeptical courtiers with such composure, he felt more confident than ever that she would make an excellent queen when their time came. The investigation, meanwhile, continued to uncover new evidence of the corruption network's reach. Master Accountant Blackwood had discovered that several major government contracts had been awarded not to the most qualified bidders, but to companies that had agreed to pay substantial kickbacks to Vivian and her associates. These contracts involved everything from road construction to military supply purchases, meaning that the corruption had potentially compromised the kingdom's infrastructure and defense capabilities. One of the most troubling discoveries involved the contract for maintaining the kingdom's network of border fortifications. The company that had won this crucial work had submitted a bid that was significantly higher than its competitors, but had secured the contract through illegal payments. Worse still, subsequent inspections had revealed that much of the work had been done with substandard materials, leaving several border posts vulnerable to attack. This revelation had profound implications for national security, and Queen Isabella had immediately ordered a comprehensive review of all military contracts and installations. The possibility that Vivian's greed might have weakened the kingdom's defenses against external threats added a new dimension to the scandal and increased public anger against the disgraced noblewoman. Elena found herself working closely with General Harrison Blake, the kingdom's top military commander, to assess the extent of the security vulnerabilities. The general was a veteran of multiple border conflicts and had earned respect throughout the kingdom for his tactical brilliance and unwavering loyalty to the crown. Initially, he had been somewhat skeptical of Elena's involvement in military matters, but her thorough preparation and intelligent questions had quickly won his respect. During one of their meetings, General Blake had shared his concerns about potential threats from neighboring kingdoms that might see Aldermere's current internal focus as an opportunity for aggression. The Kingdom of Blackmore, in particular, had been making aggressive moves along the eastern border, and there were reports of unusual military activity in their frontier provinces. Elena had taken these warnings seriously and had worked with the general to develop a plan for quietly reinforcing the most vulnerable border positions while the corruption investigation continued. She understood that appearing weak or distracted during this crisis could invite external threats that would be far more dangerous than any internal political maneuvering. The royal court itself had become a much different place in the weeks following Vivian's exile. Many of the social events and informal gatherings that had been regular features of palace life had been canceled or postponed as people tried to determine which of their associates might be implicated in the expanding investigation. Lady Catherine Pemberton, one of Vivian's closest allies, had fled the kingdom entirely after learning that investigators were examining her financial records. Her sudden departure had created a cascade of panic among other nobles who had been part of Vivian's social circle, leading to a series of hasty resignations and requests for early retirement from government positions. Elena had been careful not to appear vindictive or triumphant as these developments unfolded. She understood that maintaining the stability and dignity of the monarchy required her to focus on reform and improvement rather than punishment and revenge. When asked by court journalists about the various departures and resignations, she had consistently emphasized the importance of moving forward rather than dwelling on past mistakes. This approach had served her well in dealing with Prince Theodore, who remained devastated by his wife's betrayal. The gentle prince had offered to resign from all his official duties and withdraw from public life, feeling that his association with Vivian had irreparably damaged his reputation and usefulness to the crown. Elena had spent several long conversations with Theodore, helping him understand that his brother Marcus and Queen Isabella still valued his contributions and wanted him to remain part of the royal family's public face. She had pointed out that his knowledge of literature, arts, and scholarship made him uniquely qualified to lead the kingdom's cultural and educational initiatives, roles that were separate from the political and financial matters where Vivian had caused so much damage. Gradually, Theodore had begun to emerge from his shell of shame and self-doubt. Elena's patient support and Queen Isabella's continued confidence in him had helped him realize that he could rebuild his reputation through dedicated service rather than retreat into obscurity. His first public appearance after the scandal had been at the opening of a new library in the capital city, where his obvious passion for learning and literature had reminded everyone of his positive qualities. The relationship between Elena and Queen Isabella had grown even stronger during this period of crisis. The older woman had come to rely heavily on Elena's insights and advice, recognizing that her daughter-in-law possessed both the intelligence to understand complex problems and the courage to pursue difficult solutions. Their daily meetings had become a cornerstone of the palace's routine, with Elena providing updates on the investigation's progress and the Queen offering guidance on navigating the political implications of various discoveries. These conversations had also deepened their personal bond, as Queen Isabella shared stories of her own experiences with court intrigue and political challenges during her long reign. One evening, as they sat together in the Queen's private sitting room, Isabella had confided her concerns about the succession. While Prince Marcus was clearly the rightful heir, the current crisis had highlighted the importance of having strong, trustworthy people in positions of influence. She had expressed her relief that Marcus would have Elena as his partner when their time came to rule, and her confidence that together they would be able to handle whatever challenges the future might bring. The conversation had moved Elena deeply, as she realized how much trust and responsibility the Queen was placing in her. The weight of that trust was both inspiring and humbling, reinforcing her determination to prove worthy of the confidence that had been shown in her. Public opinion throughout the kingdom had been largely supportive of the Queen's decision to back Elena over Vivian. The common people had always been somewhat suspicious of Vivian's obvious wealth and extravagant lifestyle, particularly since she had come from relatively modest origins. Elena's more restrained style and genuine interest in social welfare had resonated much more strongly with ordinary citizens. Market vendors, farmers, and craftsmen who had never paid much attention to court politics suddenly found themselves discussing the royal family with enthusiasm and hope. Many saw Elena's victory as evidence that merit and integrity could still triumph over corruption and manipulation, even in the highest circles of society. The merchant class, in particular, had rallied strongly behind Elena's reform efforts. Honest business owners had long been frustrated by the unfair advantages that corrupt officials gave to their preferred partners, and they saw the new Royal Integrity Commission as an opportunity to compete on a more level playing field. Master tradesman Robert Cooper, who represented the city's Guild of Metalworkers, had publicly praised Elena's initiatives during a meeting of the Merchant Council. He had spoken eloquently about how corruption had forced honest businesses to either compromise their principles or lose lucrative contracts to less scrupulous competitors. The reforms, he argued, would ultimately strengthen the kingdom's economy by rewarding efficiency and quality rather than political connections. Elena had made a point of attending several meetings with merchant groups and trade associations, listening to their concerns and incorporating their suggestions into her reform proposals. This direct engagement with the business community had been unusual for a member of the royal family, but it had proven highly effective in building support for the changes she was advocating. The international implications of the crisis had also begun to emerge as foreign kingdoms watched Aldermere's internal struggles with great interest. Some neighboring rulers had expressed private concerns about the stability of Queen Isabella's government, wondering whether the corruption scandal might indicate deeper weaknesses that could be exploited. Ambassador William Thornfield, Aldermere's representative to the Kingdom of Eastport, had sent several dispatches warning that King Frederick of Eastport was asking pointed questions about the scope of the corruption and its potential impact on existing trade agreements. There were rumors that Eastport might seek to renegotiate several treaties if they believed Aldermere was in a weakened position. Elena had worked with the Queen's diplomatic advisors to craft responses that projected strength and confidence while acknowledging the seriousness with which the kingdom was addressing its internal problems. The key message was that the discovery and elimination of corruption demonstrated the health of Aldermere's institutions rather than their weakness, and that the kingdom would emerge from this crisis stronger and more reliable than ever. As the second month of the crisis began, Elena reflected on how much her life had changed since she had first uncovered evidence of Vivian's corruption. What had started as a routine diplomatic mission had evolved into a fundamental transformation of her role within the royal family and her relationship with the kingdom she had come to love. The challenges ahead were still significant. The investigation would likely continue for many more months. The reform process would require sustained effort and political will, and there would undoubtedly be additional attempts by Vivian's remaining allies to undermine Elena's position and credibility. But Elena faced these challenges with confidence and determination, knowing that she had the support of Queen Isabella, the love of Prince Marcus, and the backing of the kingdom's people. Most importantly, she had proven to herself that she possessed the strength and wisdom necessary to help guide Aldermere through difficult times toward a brighter future. #The Crown's Choice. Part 3. 6 months had passed since the explosive revelations that had shattered Lady Vivian's carefully constructed web of corruption, and the Kingdom of Aldermere was experiencing the most significant political transformation in a generation. Princess Elena's reform initiatives had begun to show tangible results, but they had also triggered a fierce backlash from entrenched interests that threatened to destabilize everything she had worked to achieve. The morning brought troubling news that would test Elena's resolve like never before. Master Accountant Geoffrey Blackwood arrived at her study with a grim expression and a leather portfolio containing documents that would change the course of the entire investigation. What he had discovered was evidence of a conspiracy far more sophisticated and dangerous than anyone had previously imagined. Elena studied the papers spread across her mahogany desk as Blackwood explained their significance. The documents revealed that Vivian's corruption network had not been an isolated scheme, but rather one tentacle of a larger operation with connections that reached into neighboring kingdoms. Foreign agents had been working systematically to weaken Aldermere's government through bribery, blackmail, and the cultivation of corrupt officials who could be manipulated to serve external interests. The implications were staggering. Some of the infrastructure failures that had been attributed to simple corruption now appeared to have been deliberate acts of sabotage designed to weaken the kingdom's defensive capabilities. The substandard materials used in border fortifications, the delayed construction of strategic roads, and the diversion of funds from military supplies all took on new meaning when viewed as part of a coordinated campaign of economic and military espionage. Elena felt a chill of fear as she realized how close the kingdom had come to serious danger. If the foreign conspiracy had succeeded in fully compromising key government officials, Aldermere could have faced invasion or economic collapse without ever understanding the true source of its vulnerabilities. Only Vivian's greed and carelessness had exposed the network before it could achieve its ultimate objectives. Queen Isabella received this news with the calm determination that had characterized her response to every crisis during her 30-year reign. In an emergency session of the Royal Council, she authorized Elena to expand her investigation with additional resources and broader authority. The Royal Integrity Commission would now work closely with the kingdom's intelligence services to identify and neutralize any remaining foreign agents or compromised officials. The Queen also made a decision that surprised many observers by appointing Elena as Special Advisor for National Security Reform, a newly created position that gave her direct authority over both the corruption investigation and the counterintelligence efforts. The appointment represented an unprecedented level of trust and responsibility being placed in someone who had been part of the royal family for less than a decade. Prince Marcus strongly supported his mother's decision, recognizing that Elena's unique combination of diplomatic experience and investigative skill made her ideally suited for the role. He had watched his wife handle months of intense pressure and criticism with grace and determination, never wavering in her commitment to uncovering the truth regardless of personal cost. The announcement of Elena's new position sent shockwaves through the remaining elements of Vivian's old network. Several nobles who had thought themselves safely hidden from investigation suddenly found themselves under intense scrutiny as Elena's expanded team began following the foreign connections that had been revealed in the latest documents. Lord Ashford Blackthorne, one of the kingdom's most powerful landowners, became the first major figure to be arrested under the new security protocols. Evidence had emerged that he had been receiving substantial payments from agents of the Kingdom of Shadowmere in exchange for information about Aldermere's agricultural production and trade routes. The intelligence he had provided could have been used to time market manipulations or even coordinate military actions against vulnerable supply lines. The arrest of someone as prominent as Lord Blackthorne sent a clear message that no one would be considered too important or well-connected to face justice. Elena had insisted on personally reviewing all the evidence before approving the arrest warrant, knowing that any mistakes or overreach would be seized upon by her critics as proof that the investigation had gone too far. The evidence against Blackthorne was overwhelming. Financial records showed regular payments from shell companies that investigators had traced back to Shadowmere Intelligence Services. Correspondence found in his estate detailed conversations about crop yields, shipping schedules, and harvest forecasts that would have been valuable to foreign traders seeking to manipulate grain prices. Most damaging of all was a letter in Blackthorne's own handwriting expressing satisfaction at the damage being done to that foreign princess and her naive reforms. The document made it clear that he saw Elena's investigation not as a threat to his criminal activities, but as an attack on the natural order that had allowed men like him to profit from their positions while serving foreign masters. Elena felt no satisfaction in Blackthorne's downfall, understanding that each arrest represented a betrayal of trust that weakened the kingdom's institutions and damaged public confidence in their government. But she also knew that allowing corruption and foreign influence to fester would cause far greater damage in the long run than the short-term pain of rooting it out completely. The investigation had also revealed the sophisticated methods used by foreign agents to recruit and control their assets within Aldermere. Rather than relying solely on bribery, they had employed a combination of financial incentives, blackmail, and ideological manipulation to build a network of collaborators who genuinely believed they were serving their own interests rather than those of foreign power. Many of the corrupted officials had been convinced that they were part of a modernization effort that would bring Aldermere's outdated institutions into line with more progressive kingdoms. They had been told that traditional values of loyalty and service were holding back economic development, and that more flexible approaches to governance would ultimately benefit everyone. Elena recognized the insidious nature of these arguments because they contained just enough truth to be persuasive. Aldermere did need to modernize many of its institutions, and some traditional practices were indeed obstacles to progress. But the foreign agents had twisted these legitimate concerns into justifications for betraying their oaths and serving external interests that were fundamentally hostile to the kingdom's welfare. The psychological manipulation involved in the conspiracy impressed even veteran intelligence officers who had seen many forms of espionage and subversion. Captain Sarah Nightingale, who led the Royal Guard's counterintelligence unit, had expressed admiration for the sophistication of the operation even as she worked to dismantle it. Elena had spent long hours working with Captain Nightingale and her team, learning about the tradecraft and methodologies that enemy agents use to penetrate foreign governments. The education was both fascinating and frightening, as she came to understand how vulnerable even well-intentioned officials could be to skilled manipulators who knew how to exploit their weaknesses and blind spots. The broader public had initially been skeptical when news of the foreign conspiracy emerged, with many citizens finding it hard to believe that their own nobles could have been working for enemy kingdoms. But as more evidence became public and additional arrests were made, the reality of the threat began to sink in throughout Aldemir society. Tavern conversations that had once focused on local gossip and commercial concerns now included heated debates about national security and the reliability of government officials. Citizens who had never paid much attention to foreign policy suddenly found themselves deeply concerned about the intentions of neighboring kingdoms and the adequacy of Aldemir's defenses against subversion. Elena had made a point of addressing these concerns through a series of public forums where citizens could ask questions and express their anxieties about the ongoing investigation. These events were unprecedented in royal history, as no member of the ruling family had ever engaged so directly with ordinary people about matters of state security. The forums had been remarkably successful in calming public fears while building support for the reform efforts. Elena's ability to explain complex security issues in language that ordinary citizens could understand had impressed both supporters and skeptics. Her willingness to acknowledge the seriousness of the threats while expressing confidence in the kingdom's ability to address them had struck exactly the right tone for a frightened but determined population. One particularly memorable exchange had occurred when a veteran of the border wars had asked whether the foreign conspiracy meant that soldiers had died because of compromised equipment or inadequate supplies. Elena had confirmed that some military casualties could indeed be attributed to the sabotage efforts, but she had also emphasized that the investigation was ensuring that such tragedies would never happen again. The emotional weight of that revelation had been visible throughout the crowd, as people realized that the corruption they had previously seen as merely wasteful had actually cost lives. The moment had crystallized public support for Elena's efforts and made it much more difficult for critics to portray the investigation as excessive or vindictive. Prince Theodore had found unexpected redemption through his contribution to uncovering the foreign conspiracy. His scholarly background and knowledge of multiple languages had proven invaluable in analyzing intercepted communications and decoded documents. Working closely with the intelligence services had given him a sense of purpose and importance that had helped him recover from the shame of his association with Vivian. Theodore's expertise in ancient languages and historical ciphers had been particularly useful in breaking some of the more sophisticated codes used by foreign agents. His success in this area had earned him respect from intelligence professionals and had begun to restore his reputation within the royal family and broader court. Elena had been instrumental in finding ways for Theodore to contribute meaningfully to the investigation, recognizing that he needed to feel useful and valued in order to fully recover from his personal crisis. Her support had meant a great deal to the sensitive prince, and it had strengthened the bonds between all members of the core royal family. The international dimensions of the crisis had required delicate diplomatic maneuvering to avoid triggering larger conflicts while still addressing the security threats that had been identified. Elena had worked closely with the kingdom's foreign ministry to craft responses that were firm but not unnecessarily provocative toward the kingdoms that had been involved in the conspiracy. Ambassador Thornfield had reported that several neighboring rulers were now taking a much more respectful approach to their dealings with Aldemir, having realized that the kingdom was far more alert to foreign interference than they had previously believed. The successful exposure of the conspiracy had actually strengthened Aldemir's international position by demonstrating the competence of its security services and the determination of its leadership. Some foreign kingdoms had even approached Aldemir quietly to share information about their own experiences with similar conspiracy networks, suggesting that the problem was more widespread than anyone had initially realized. These exchanges had led to the beginnings of a broader cooperative effort to combat foreign subversion throughout the region. Elena had been invited to participate in several international conferences on security cooperation, recognition of her expertise, and leadership in exposing and dismantling the conspiracy. These invitations represented a significant diplomatic opportunity for Aldermere, as they positioned the kingdom as a leader in regional security efforts rather than merely a victim of foreign manipulation. As autumn arrived and the leaves began to change color in the palace gardens, Elena reflected on how much had changed since she had first uncovered evidence of Vivian's corruption. What had seemed like a relatively straightforward case of financial misconduct had evolved into the exposure of a sophisticated threat to national security that had required fundamental changes in how the kingdom approached both domestic governance and foreign relations. The Royal Integrity Commission had become a permanent institution with expanded authority and resources, serving as both an investigative body and an educational organization that helped train government officials to recognize and resist corruption and foreign influence. The success of this initiative had attracted attention from other kingdoms seeking to strengthen their own institutions against similar threats. Elena's role within the royal family had been transformed as well. No longer was she simply the foreign princess who had married Prince Marcus for love. She was now recognized as a formidable political figure in her own right whose intelligence and determination had literally saved the kingdom from catastrophe. The personal cost of this transformation had been significant, as Elena had been forced to give up much of her privacy and many of her previous interests in order to focus on the demands of her new responsibilities. But she had accepted these sacrifices willingly, understanding that her unique position gave her both the opportunity and the obligation to serve the kingdom that had become her home. Queen Isabella had announced that Elena would be formally invested with the title of Duchess of Ironhold, one of the kingdom's most historically significant duchies, in recognition of her service to the crown and the kingdom. The ceremony would take place during the annual celebration of the kingdom's founding, when all the major nobles and many foreign dignitaries would be present to witness the honor. The announcement had been met with widespread approval throughout the kingdom, as citizens recognized that Elena had earned the title through exceptional service rather than merely through her marriage to the heir apparent. Even former critics had acknowledged that her efforts had strengthened the kingdom and protected its independence from foreign manipulation. But Elena knew that challenges still lay ahead. The investigation had identified dozens of individuals who had been compromised by foreign influence, and the process of determining appropriate consequences for each case would require careful consideration of both justice and practicality. Some had been willing collaborators who deserved severe punishment, while others had been manipulated or coerced and might be rehabilitated through proper guidance and oversight. The broader reforms needed to prevent future conspiracies would also require sustained effort and political will. Changes to financial oversight procedures, improvements in security protocols, and enhanced training for government officials would all need to be implemented carefully to avoid creating new problems while solving old ones. Most importantly, Elena understood that the ultimate success of her efforts would be measured not by the number of arrests or reforms implemented, but by whether the kingdom emerged from this crisis stronger, more unified, and better prepared to face whatever challenges the future might bring.